Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Lost Through the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Josh Myota, and tonight's special guest is Earl Grey Anderson. He is the State Director of Southern California of MUFON. He is also the executive member of MUFON's ERT team. He is also a musician, a vocalist, and a songwriter, and an experiencer, so a lot to share with us tonight. Let's get into it, Earl.
How you doing, Josh?
I'm doing great. It's a real pleasure to have you on.
Fantastic. I'm happy to be on. I hear you guys are getting a little snow where you're at today, huh?
Oh, just a little.
Yeah, I guess we might be getting a blizzard conditions up in Northern California. If we get some snow here, it'll be in that because we usually don't. But I'll have to get some photos of the snow on the palm trees if we do, because you don't see that very often here in Southern.
No, I would love to see that as well.
So, but yeah, I'm state director for Southern California and MUFON, and very proud of it. I have a wonderful team that works under me, and I'm also a member of MUFON's Experiencer Resource Team, the ERT. And we work like social workers for people who have had face-to-face ET contact. For a long time, there wasn't anywhere for people to go if they had experienced this. And there has always been a ridicule factor out there concerning this phenomenon. But I have people from all walks of life, doctors, physicists, police officers, even not an astronaut, who have experienced this weird, strange phenomena, and it becomes personal. Oftentimes, people are taken or visited in their own bedroom, or I had a police officer who was abducted from his squad car while on duty. And he was a very honest guy, and he had to explain this to his colleagues. And apparently it was kind of the joke around the station, leave it to you to get abducted while on duty. But that's the sort of people that, and then, I'll have housewives and just, plumbers and whatever, it doesn't seem to be a respecter of persons, this phenomenon, or there's something that attracts them to families, certain bloodlines, it seems. Uh, but I'm just very, very busy. I'm constantly talking with people that put in their reports to MUFON, wanting to share their anomalous experiences. Oftentimes, people will get a hold of us and they're confused, or they need somebody else to talk with who's open-minded and isn't going to like have the giggle factor going with them. Because, you can say that you've seen a UFO, and it seems like some public stigma has gone off of doing that now. They're relaxing laws in the airlines. It used to be if you're a pilot and you saw a UFO, they would ground you. They would have you flying a desk, is what they would call it. But now it seems like that is more acceptable. But the next step from that is face-to-face contact, and we find that it's not an unusual thing, that it's not an uncommon thing. In the ERT, we kind of hypothesize that maybe like 1 out of 100 persons is an abductee or a visitee, contactee. And we kind of use the word experiencer as kind of a framing word, but there's many different experiences that people have. Some get downloads of arcane or knowledge that they didn't have before. Um, and then you've got certain cases where it's the proverbial abduction stuff, where ovum are taken, or where it seemed like there was a DNA farming thing going on for a long time, and that seemed to be the gist of what was happening. But it's evolved. We see the experiencer phenomena seems to have changed over the last decade or so. It seems more like downloads and arcane knowledge that's being imparted to people. It's all very strange, very, very exciting. I feel like I live in a whirlwind sometimes.
What first drew you to MUFON?
Well, I had read about MUFON for quite a while. Um, my, my maybe a little bit of my background would be helpful. My mom was one of Howard Hughes's secretaries back in the 1950s. When I was born, I'm an old guy, boomer, it's 64 at this point. Uh, but but back in 1958, when I was born, my mom retired from working for Hughes Aircraft. But when she was working for Hughes, he was a germaphobe. He just didn't want to have human contact, so he would send his secretaries out to do his business, his bidding. So my mom found herself working in underground facilities in the middle of the desert. Uh, it sounded like something right out of the X-Files. But along the way, when I was a kid, my mom talked about extraterrestrial life, not as an abstract, but as though she knew some solid facts about it, which she did. Later on, I found, like around 1977, my mom just kind of did the whole disclosure number for me. She knew she wasn't supposed to because she had signed non-disclosure agreements, but I feel like she just couldn't hold it back any longer, and she knew that it was something. It was this knowledge that was very, very important to me. So I kind of knew about the phenomena back in the late 1970s. It was always kind of there at the periphery of things, because of my mom. My mom died in 1999. But as long as she was alive, there was always the chance that she would give me the golden ticket. The just tell me the whole. This is what it is. This is what UFOs, why they're here, what they're doing. She never did that. It was always just the surface stuff. UFO real. The God knows they're real. They're never going to tell people they're real because they're afraid of how humanity is going to react. That people would probably react badly. And that was kind of where my mom left it, and she wouldn't comment further. So when she passed away, I started reading UFO literature. I think I started with things like The Day After Roswell by Philip Corso and Bill Burns. I went to Witness to Roswell, and I just kind of I read Leslie Keene's book about military and pilots and UFOs, and I kept seeing the name MUFON popping up in all these books. It was kind of a constant. So I did a little research and I found out who they were and what they were doing. And you know that when the government officially closed Project Blue Book, which was the Air Force's investigation into the phenomenon, they closed the door in 1969. They said there's nothing to worry about. They didn't say it wasn't real, by the way. They didn't go there. They didn't say that, but they did say it's no threat to our national security and move along, folks. More or less is what they did. So in 1969, MUFON opened their doors up, the Mutual UFO Network. Started out as the Midwestern UFO Network, but at that point, there was room for a worldwide organization because the Air Force dropped the ball. They dropped the ball on it, at least publicly. I'm sure that they've always been interested in this phenomena. They've always been looking into it. And now we find out, certain documents are coming out finally that prove that they've always had an interest in this phenomenon throughout history. But MUFON opened doors. We're a private corporation. We're all volunteers. None of us are paid for what we do. It's just for love of the phenomenon and trying to understand this greatest, most interesting thing that's happening on the planet. So I joined MUFON. I became a field investigator. You take a test, you read the field investigator's handbook and test. They do a background check you because they don't want serial killers or anything joining the organization. And about 7.5 years, 8 years ago, almost now, and at this point now, I've actually recently investigated over 900 different UFO reports that I've investigated, have come up with a disposition for and closed for MUFON. I think that's some kind of a record. I'm not sure what, but that's how I started, and that's how I joined MUFON. Was I heard about the group? I looked them up. I was impressed with what I had learned about them. They weren't connected to the government. It was a private organization. It was the stars were aligned there for me. It sounded perfect, and it was, because here I am running MUFON in Southern California now.
That's so awesome. And right around that time, you were getting involved in music too, the music scene, correct?
I've been a musician most of my life. The first band I was ever in was when I was about 14 years old, just playing little junior high school dances and things like that. But we were actually playing paying gigs when I was 14, 13 and 14. And I worked in the music scene for many years here in Los Angeles. I've done a lot of studio musician work. I do have 3 albums out with or 2 albums out with my duo Piper Grey. You can find one. It's called Apples. It's streamable on Spotify and all your streaming services. It should be on there if you have Pandora or any of those. And I have a solo album called Lover's Ridge by Earl Grey. It is also available on streaming services everywhere. And the music's always been there. I mean, I'm still playing gigs, I mean, there's not as much time to do it anymore. But, once a musician, you're always a musician.
Would you say the phenomenon has inspired your music?
Oh, yeah, sure. Even before I was investigating the phenomenon, I wrote a song called Seventh Sister that was about the Pleiades, and it was about a love affair having with, I guess that it was a visiting humanoid ET, and suddenly she's gone. She had to go back home, and that star in the sky dimmed, and that did happen to one of the 7 stars in the Pleiades constellation. It was called the Seven Sisters throughout history, and then at some point, some hundreds of years ago, one of the stars dimmed till you could only see it with a telescope now. And it was a song waiting to be born. I saw it, I thought about it. And I kind of saw this boatman, looking up at the stars at night, paddling this canoe somewhere, wishing that his lover was back, but she's across the galaxy now. So, it's always been there in my music. I've got another song called "I Believe in You" that's similar. It's that I'll believe in the crazy story that you tell me, because I've had crazy stuff happen to myself. So yeah, music. If you're a songwriter and you're actually writing from your heart, the things that you love, the things that you're obsessed with, they're going to pop up in your music. Just there's no way for it not to happen, and for your songs to still be meaningful.
Another thing I was going to ask you, which you don't need to bring up any names because I know that you guys have a secrecy when it comes to your clients, is what is your most profound case you've worked as a field agent?
I was asked, I was asked to speak at Alien Con on one of our panels, and they asked me for the same thing, which is your favorite case? And it's so hard to decide because there's so many of them. Usually it's going to be one of the cases I'm working on right now, because that's what I'm attuned to. I'm working on a case right now where 2 pilots in the Navigator on a flight that was between Japan and Hawaii saw 3 silver flying saucers, no other name for them, that were hanging there over the horizon. They were right past the international date line, like a minute past it. Still pitch dark. You could see the stars above, but you could see the sun was just rising up over the horizon. And they're in this perfect triangular, like standing, pattern, were these 3 discs just hanging there. He said that they must have been 200 feet across a piece. They also, both pilots saw it and the navigator. They documented it on their flight logbook, and I have a photograph of the logbook from that day. Well, the one pilot is ready to retire next year, and he wants to come forward, and he came forward with his case. And so that's one of the cases I'm working on right now, and it's quite extensive because the same pilot had another sighting in this last December over near the Channel Islands area of California. And there were two other commercial jets that also saw this UFO. They call it the racetrack UFO. And this is like the third person to come forward, third pilot in a row to come forward and say that they'd seen this anomalous craft. Way, way up there. It was like almost an orbit, but it seemed to be tracking them, and it was moving in like a racetrack kind of pattern over them. Anyway, that's a case I'm working on. I'm also I always have experiencer cases going, and they always fascinate me. I had a recent case where a woman, when she was a child, lived with her family in a forest. Her father was a forest ranger, and they had housing there in this national forest, so it was kind of remote. She looked out her window, and she saw what I guess you would call orbs. They're these spherical, self-lit objects that were moving and lighting up the front of their house. And she pulled herself out of bed. This kid was disabled. Her lungs were so bad that they didn't think she was going to live past puberty. That was it was a very sad diagnosis on a prognosis for this kid. So she went to the window and she's watching these things moving around, and one came up right to the window, and it became the face of a gray alien, sort of like what's over your shoulder there, except maybe a little nicer looking. She said she didn't think he was trying to scare her, but she thought that he wanted her to know who was helping her. That was the last thing that she remembered. Next morning, she woke up in bed. There was like a scab over most of her face, like stuff had been coming out of her nose all night. Mom had to put hot compresses on her face to remove this thing. She was telling her mom about this weird experience she had and about the face in the window and all this. When the mom realizes it's the first time she's ever heard her daughter where she wasn't wheezing, her lungs were perfectly clear. And my gosh, this kid was fully healed. Now she's like in her mid-50s now, lived a normal life, when became a rebellious teenager like the rest of us. You have that to look forward to with your kids, probably. We all have to go through that process.
Yay.
But she's lived like a normal life. But here she is, she's in her mid-50s, and she wanted to talk with somebody at MUFON and talk about this experience. Her brother was involved as well. Her mom was involved, but the mom doesn't want to talk about it. Mom is like in her late 80s, still all there, sharp as a tack, but it's just too disturbing. So she thinks that the whole family was probably abducted in this situation, but she was the one that was healed from this malady. And I love the case. And something else I love about it, she's watching these spherical objects, orbs, some people call them. MUFON doesn't like that word because it gets tossed around. I mean, I have a pilot that saw a 300-foot sphere come out of the ocean. That's not an orb, okay? That's like a 300-foot sphere. But these were little small things. They're floating around, seeming like they were dancing together, But then she noticed that they had smiling faces. At first they didn't, and then they did. And my feeling is that this was a screen image that was given to her so that she wouldn't be afraid as a child. And then right before they put her out, she saw who it was. It was a gray ET. But this woman was fully healed. Speaking with her brother, I mean, there was a lot of emotion on the phone. She was near sobbing at a couple points because this was so meaningful to her. So that's a favorite case, and it's it's one that I just kind of recently. So it's on my mind. But I mean, I have so many cases like that. It would take all day to go through them all for you.
But it's from what I've been talking to people who say they're contactees. That's really what I've been getting. It's usually somebody who has something horribly wrong or some sort of trauma that they need to deal with that they work through or they are healed. It never they took an organ from me or they
Yeah, yeah.
they
I don't hear
it's
that either.
never like
Yeah,
on TV
yeah.
makes it or movies.
I mean, I've had people who've reacted badly to it just because it was so weird, and they felt like they were being invaded or something, their privacy. One German gentleman kept having an implant put into his foot by the same entities. It kept showing up, and he'd go to the surgeon. He'd have it taken out surgically, and then it would happen again, and they would put it right back in. And this guy he wanted to sleep with a rifle, and he hoped that before they could paralyze him, he could shoot him. It's like, dude, you'll start an interstellar war, or maybe you'll shoot your neighbor. It's going to go through the wall. You don't sleep with your rifle and don't shoot at ETs. Um, I don't know that there's some malevolent reason for tagging us. Well, we usually tag endangered animals, and maybe that's what we are to them. Maybe we're endangered, so they want to know where we are, and they're checking our health. I mean, that's what we do. We'll spot the lion through its transponder that we put into its ear or whatever, and we tranquilize them. We take their blood to check, if they're healthy or not, and then we leave them there, as they were. It sounds a lot like an abduction experience to me.
I have this theory. I don't have much to go off of it though, but I almost wonder if they're tagging us with it has something to do with our pollution levels, if they're checking in on our vital
Maybe.
signs frequently, and this is hunch that I have.
Good hunch. Maybe the cows too. They keep finding these cows that along the road in rural places, and where there's no blood and certain organs are removed and stuff. But that's kind of what it seems like. Oftentimes this happens in areas that are near, like where they tested the atomic bomb, or they were working on certain chemicals and stuff that could be harmful to people, and maybe they're just trying to make sure that we're going to be okay. I know that experiencers are left with the same message over and over again. They're left with a telepathic message that says, you have to stop building nuclear weapons. You have to stop warring with each other. You're going to you're going to kill yourselves off, and you need to stop polluting the planet. You only get one, and you're destroying your beautiful biosphere. People from all walks of life, all political forums. It doesn't matter if it's somebody who's a liberal, conservative, or their religion or their creed, or their race. They're left with the same messages, and it seems to stick with people. It's meaningful to people. So there's definitely a message that's being put out there. Let's take care of your world, take care of yourselves, and stop killing each other. You know those are all good things to live by. That doesn't sound like
Right.
the influence of some malevolent force to me. That doesn't sound like the Darth Vader knocking
No.
at the back door to me. So
Now you look at our country though, and you start to recognize the empire just a little bit.
well, I know, and I think that I think officialdom. I mean, it's weird for me because my mom was part of that. Okay, I mean, she was working with Lockheed. I think that she had a hand in the F-117 program because she had right before the first Gulf War. She had to leave for a month. It was through work. She couldn't tell us where she was going. It was through one of the aerospace companies that she was working for. She would call us on Saturdays at a distinct time, and it was this long distance phone call that sounded like miles and miles away. Well, she came home with her suitcase had sand, Headscarves, multiple headscarves, and gold chains and stuff. So finally, talking with her, I got it out of her finally that yeah, she was in the Middle East and had a security detail with her when she'd go to the bazaar, and because they would let her out once in a while. She got home, and a week later, the first Gulf War started. And Lockheed Skunk Works was who built the F-117 stealth bomber. So I kind of connect the dots. I'm pretty darn sure my mom was on that program, although she couldn't talk about it. She couldn't talk about it. And she would tell me that. She'd say, I can't talk about that, son. I'm sorry. Your mother could get into trouble. I could go to prison. I can't talk about it. And that would be it, you know.
Oh man, that would have been
But
so
officialdom
hard growing
knows.
up.
I know. It drove me nuts. I mean, I'd try to trick her. I mean, she talked when her to see Star Wars is when I got my blah, when she did her disclosure number on me. And I later on I was hoping that she would talk more. So I took her to see the movie E.T. And I'm waiting for her to say something, doesn't say anything. I finally said, what do you think of the movie, Mom? And she said, it was cute, but I don't think they're that nice, son. And that's all she'd say. She'd say anything else. So she knew some stuff, but she was only willing to kind of share what she could, and she would have to calm me down on the other stuff. So here I am. Now it's like I've had a few guys in the DOD talk with me who've told me they've read my mom's file. They both said the same thing. I can't tell you too much about your mom, except that she didn't lie to you, that you can be very proud of your mom, that she was trusted with some of the nation's greatest secrets. And that's about all I can tell you. And I'll go, well, you can't even read anything from her file. It's like, no, it's sealed. Her file is sealed. And I mean, she was doing this in the 50s. So, I mean, it must be pretty darn secretive if it's still sealed today.
I mean, in your other documentary too, you even talked about the underground base she was in back then, and I that blew my mind that something even existed like that in the 50s, and how they put in
Mm-hmm.
they
I
made the
think I
little
might know
French
where it was.
cafe.
I mean, again, I have, as long as my mom was alive, there was always a chance she would tell me more. She didn't. Then there was always the chance that one of her colleagues, maybe I'd bump into somebody that knew her. And I still ask people when I meet older people that are in this, in aerospace work. I always ask them, you didn't happen to know my mom, did you? And, yeah, a couple people might have, but they're not talking. Um, but it could be frustrating because she couldn't tell me any more than she did. I know that she wanted to tell me more. She left a nice trail of breadcrumbs for me to follow, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm following up on a lot of stuff. But I think that she might have been stationed in White Sands, New Mexico, because I've heard from other children of people that were in the Air Force, worked with Project Blue Book and things like that. And I hear that there was a computer facility that was a mile under the desert that was there in the late 1950s and the early 1960s. Werner von Braun, I know he was stationed at White Sands Air Force Base. And my mom was friends with Werner von Braun. I mean, he would pop up on Walt Disney or something, and my mom would go, there's my friend Werner. She said, charming man. And, it's like, wasn't he a Nazi, Mom? How could he be charming? And then she would say, well, he wasn't really a Nazi. They forced him to work for Hitler. They would have killed him and his family if he hadn't, but he just wanted to go to the moon. That was his obsession. And my mom used to quote him. She said, Werner said that we built the rockets right, but we sent them to the wrong planet. And he was talking about the V2 bombs that they built, that they sent over to London. They were bombing Liverpool and London during World War II. And well, that was Werner's from the Mittelwerks in Germany, which he was the head of. When he was able to get away from there, right immediately he focused on getting us to the moon, and he was the guy that came up with the three-tiered three-stage rocket that we used with the Apollo missions. So Anyway, but that's my mom's weird background, and I grew up with that. When she told me about working in the underground base, I was 5 years old. Later on, I did like a show and tell in fourth grade. And the teacher called my mom in for parent teacher conference because she was very disturbed with this show and tell I did, talking about my mom working in a deep underground little city under the desert. And oh, by the way, UFOs are real. So I got the lecture when my mom drove me home that day. It's 10 years old. Earl, you can't ever talk about this ever again in school or to any of your friends. Oh my God, how did you remember that? You were just a baby when I told you. And that was her reaction. She said, "You can't talk about this, son, because people don't know about it. They don't know about a little city under the desert. They don't know about UFOs. Your mom could go to prison if you talk about it." So that shut me up for many years. They can't put her in prison now, so I'm talking. And I never signed any non-disclosure agreements, so I'm talking.
Right. Another question I had. How many cases do you think you've done since you joined MUFON?
Well, I'm like at 900 and something. If you that's just pretty much UFO reports. If you bring in the experiencer case I've worked on, then it's probably over 1,000. It for sure is over 1,000. We used to not keep track of those. It was very secretive. I would keep like a little paper file on my ERT cases, and I would keep it in a safe. Now they have the ERT cases built into the MUFON computer system, but only so many people. There's only three people that can look at that. The director of MUFON can look at that. MUFON's director of investigations, Steve Hudgens, can see those documents, and Dr. George Medich, who runs the ERT, Dr. Medich can read those. That's it. So they're still kept secretive, but MUFON decided that we should keep some kind of a log of those cases, but the names aren't on them, and we keep it very, very anonymous because experiencer cases, I mean, there's a ridicule factor out there. There still is, but it's, probably 1,000, Josh. What can I say? I mean, it's like my wife, it's like, go to a movie and let's not talk about UFOs tonight, please. Or honey, because I think I'm sort of walking, talking 24/7 UFOs now because it's become my life. I worked as a nurse all of my life, and I retired from nursing a couple of years ago. And so now I'm ufology full time, and I'm as busy now as when I was working 12-hour nursing cases. In fact, busier. So it just, I love it. And it's a good thing I messed with it.
I can
Aliens did
imagine.
invade my life. I don't think they're invading yours, but they certainly invaded my personal life. Yes.
um, Another question I was going to ask. Uh, what is your thoughts on the apparent four UFOs that have been taken down?
They were
So-called.
calling them UFOs, weren't they? They were calling
Right.
UFOs. They never do that. The media, it's always like, or they'll play silly
Right.
X Files music, and but something changed, and I've got my own personal opinion on it. I'm not sure if I'm correct, but I think that there are those in officialdom that want disclosure to happen, but there are those in officialdom that do not want disclosure to happen. It's like my mom told me back in, when I was 20 years old. She said they will never tell the public. They're afraid of how the public will react. And I think that that's still probably the main reason why they're not telling us. They're afraid that people are going to go brandish guns. They're going to go, they're going to go nuts. They're going to use it for a reason to revolt, or, I mean, so I think that there are those in officialdom that are dragging their feet on the issue. And so if they call all these balloons UFOs on the news, It'll get it into people's minds that, oh, well, they're all balloons. That's what people are seeing. And they're not. They're not. The people aren't just seeing balloons. But it is a good excuse for them to use to kind of shuffle the phenomena under the mat one more time and kick the football down the pike for the next generation to worry about. They keep doing that. There are people in officialdom that wanted to release this to the public back in the 1950s. But, the Roswell crash was on the front page of many newspapers in the nation the next day. And what did they do? And they covered it up. They said it was just a weather balloon. And here we go, balloons. I don't think that that's any, coincidence there. They're lighter than air. They float, and that's what they're going to blame UFOs on, I think. So I don't think they were shooting down alien spaceships.
Oh, absolutely not.
No.
It's just strange, though, that last year they were calling them UAPs, too, and now it's back to UFOs all of a sudden.
They wanted to rebrand it, and they wanted to control the story. And they don't want people bringing up the old UFO stories from the 1960s, 70s, 80s. And they want to act like this is some new phenomena that they've never been aware of before, and they're suddenly interested in it. Then we know that's not true, because I can show you documents with, the FOIA requests that we have put in on past, sightings and cases. They've been well aware of this phenomenon. And so they wanted to rebrand it as UAPs. That wasn't working too good for them. So now they're going to call them UFOs, but they're going to say that they're all balloons. Just watch and tell me I'm right when you see it, because I swear it's going to happen. It is, Oh, well. They keep doing this. It seems it's like Lucy and Charlie Brown. She's holding the football, and you're almost ready to kick that sucker, and then they pull it away at the last minute. And
that is the greatest analogy for disclosure in the U.S. government I think I've heard.
Yeah.
With this all being said, and with you being the MUFON director, has the U.S. government ever interfered with your guys' cases at all over the years?
They've never interfered with our cases, but they're definitely interested in our cases. Congress is talking with MUFON. We've been having, scheduled meetings. Apparently, MUFON has been asked to share some of our better cases with Congress, and there's a dialogue going on now that and it's out in the open. And before it wasn't. So this is a good thing. This is more transparency, and I'm all for that. But I don't think they've interfered with any of my cases. We may have had plants here and there. It's the oldest game in the world in ufology. You go to a UFO Congress, and the game is called Who's the Spook? You look around the room, and I recognize that black suit and that tie. It looks like, Man in Black, proverbial out of the movie, And there's that element. There's the espionage element. I think there's interest in this phenomenon. And it's not just the U.S. government. It's, Russia, China, France. It's just, they all know it's there. They don't like the fact that they can't control it. They like even less that they can't explain it thoroughly, because it's unlike any other phenomenon. UFOs are 100% physical, but they have there's telepathic things to it. There's almost like a ghostly thing that goes around them. And I think that they use portal technology to get around. And you open up a portal, stuff gets through. Stuff that you didn't maybe necessarily want to have come through will come through. Maybe that's some of the cryptid sightings people see and stuff, and you open up a portal, stuff's going to come on through, That, my opinion anyway. It's not
right. That has,
I think, too much.
Been the odd thing I've had come across with this too is when I deal with people with cryptid experiences, they usually have had UFO experiences as well. Mm-hmm. So
they seem to go hand
that's
in
a very
hand,
great theory.
One thing I think that, MUFON is trying to be scientific. They don't want to have a lot in common with the National Enquirer and stuff like that. Aliens ate my baby or what. But the trouble is that it seems like every really good case has sort of intentional absurdity built into it. It's almost like the phenomenon is winking at us or playing with our scientists, saying, "Oh, you think you have this figured out? Well, guess what? I'm going to pull the rug out from under you again." I think it's just the nature of this phenomena. I don't think that it's the same as most things that we study scientifically. It's not going to sit under your microscope. Probably isn't going to sit in front of your telescope for long either. And if you think that you're outside of its realm of influence, you're in for a surprise. I've found that if you start digging into this, or you start investigating UFOs, don't be surprised if UFOs start investigating you. It seems like it almost opens a door for it sometimes. I mean, I tell my new field investigators all that. I give them that little heads up. I joined MUFON. I started investigating UFOs, and I didn't get abducted, but I had aliens come and visit me, and I'm sure that happened because of what I was doing. So it's an interactive phenomenon. And the CE5 thing does seem to work. Just don't pay somebody to do it. You can do it yourself. You just get into a meditative state. If you don't know how to do it, you can just find videos on the internet for free that'll teach you how to get into a meditative state. And if you put out the message, I want to meet you, or I want to see a UFO, I would amend that with saying I would like to meet a benevolent ETs, and I don't want medical experiments done on myself, but I do want contact, or I want to see something. It oftentimes works, I hear it over and over again. So, but you don't have to pay some doctor or something $3,500 or whatever. I'm not going to mention the guy's name. I mean, I think there are people that are
I got an
charging
idea
money
who you're
for
talking
something.
about.
Yeah, there are people that are charging money for something that you can do just as easily yourself, and probably even have better results on your own. But that's just me.
That's the dark side of this phenomenon. There is a lot of people out there I have come across that are off to profit, like every other thing on the planet. um,
Yeah.
so yes, you definitely have to be wary. I really do question the people that say, "I'm talking to Palladians. We'll tell you your star calendar, but you need to pay me $175." I'm like, well, I wonder how them Palladians would feel about that.
Yeah. These are the guys that are probably getting probed.
Yeah.
We'll show him. Just charge that guy $3,500 to see a UFO. He gets probed tonight, right? That's not true. I'm making that up, you guys. But anyway, just a joke.
Another case.
They're not circus performers, right? I mean, it's not like ETs are on anybody's payroll to show up. I mean, it kind of cheapens it, I think, to pay somebody to do that. If you want to meet them, you go to them yourself. That's what I did, and it worked a little too well.
I was going to ask you, what are your thoughts about the Phoenix Lights phenomenon from
amazing,
back in the 90s?
A show of power by our visitors, I think. I think that I know quite a few people that witnessed that eyes on and were there, and it made a huge difference in their lives. There is a question of, well, maybe it was the government, trying like, projection, holographic projection or something, but I don't think that would be possible, because there were pilots that saw it from above and there were people that saw it from below. I mean, Kurt Russell saw it. He was flying a private Piper Cub into the airport in Tucson, I think it was, or was it the Phoenix airport? And he actually called in on his radio and reported the Phoenix Lights from the air. and then he forgot that he did it. I mean, this is one of the weird things about the phenomena. I mean, it is in control. So he made the phone call. He had a sighting. It just blew his mind to the point where he reported it, and then it was wiped from his thoughts. And he didn't remember it again until years later, and he saw a program about the Phoenix Lights, and it all came back, like crashing back. The full memory is like, oh my God, I saw that. I reported that. I mean, because it had been wiped from the man's memory. Such a weird phenomena. But yeah, I think that was our visitors. And, I think that there's various races that are visiting us. I don't think it's just all one thing. I think some of it is probably dimensional. Some of it may be extraterrestrial. Uh, some of it may be us from the future. I mean, I don't close the door on any of those possibilities, because we see things in common with people's sightings, but then there are those that are very well founded sightings that I just are sort of one offs. The Hopkinsville incident with a little gremlin like
Right.
ET.
That was such
I
a
mean, it's such a
strange.
weird one. And this was a multi-witness thing. And people were going, oh, well, they were drinking moonshine. Well, I don't know. I've had a little
No, I don't
moonshine
think
before,
so.
and it doesn't make you hallucinate. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I mean, it was all, I mean, and there's so many cases like that are just one-off weird. And I love those cases. Things like the Flatwood
Mm,
Monster and stuff like that. It's just so strange. But stuff gets in, you guys. And maybe we are kind of a way station or a vacation spot. Come to beautiful Earth, see the biosphere before they destroy it with their nuclear weapons.
Very possible. I always thought too the Hopkins goblins might be a cryptid of some sort. It was just
That's
so
weird.
strange.
They're bulletproof. I mean, the guy
Right.
shot the one and he like flipped over and he's standing back on his feet. I mean, it's just so weird. It's just absurd. But I think that that's kind of their signature sometimes. They like absurdity for some reason.
Right? It's even possible it could have been some younger shape-shifting race that's like, hey, let's go mess with them for a night and see what
Maybe.
happens.
I don't
Mom
know.
and
They
dad
tried
are
to
out of
blame it
town. We'll
on
get away with it or something.
they
I
tried to
don't know.
blame it on circus monkeys. I mean, they thought that they were monkeys that escaped from a traveling circus. There were all kinds of, you know,
I've heard that one too.
hypotheticals.
Bulletproof monkeys.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'd like to see that. Yeah. Oh my gosh. But yeah, it's a very strange phenomena that keeps me going. I mean, so many of the cases you see the same markers. It's like they my room flooded with light. They took blood or they took DNA or they did this or that. But then there are those cases that are just those the Eagle River case with Joe Simonson, where they a flying saucer lands, the little door opens, and there are two humanoids sitting there around this cosmic hibachi oven. They hand him a pitcher, ask him for clean water, clear water is what they asked for, clear water. So he gets some water from the well, brings it back. What do? They make him buckwheat pancakes. And they gave him 3 pancakes to take home, take home, here's your doggy bag. And the hatch closes and they take off. And there he is with this weird story and 3 kind of nasty pancakes. They apparently didn't taste very good. But I mean, it's just so intentionally absurd. I think that it means to be that. It's confounding us, maybe winking at us, laughing at our scientists a little bit, who think everything is explainable, and try to explain that. What's this show called
Right?
again? Down the Rabbit Hole. Well, there you
Lost through
go.
the rabbit hole.
Yeah, well, there you go.
That
That's
almost seems like that too. Like they're just like, oh, well, you think you know everything? We'll have some pancakes.
Isn't that great? And for me, I see the humor in it. I'm glad that our visitors have a sense of humor. I've heard this elsewhere that they have a sense of humor. They're not humorless. You know, I remember reading, I think it was Larry Niven, the science fiction author. He was a physics professor at UCLA. Wrote wonderful science fiction novels like Ringworld and such. But he said once in a essay that he wrote that laughter is an interrupted war cry. That laughter could be considered a great sign of intelligence, and that a, a race is able to move beyond its warrior instincts. Because if you think about a laugh, you open your mouth, you bare your teeth. It's just like you're gonna, bite the person's head off, and then you realize the same dumb thing that could have happened to me. I mean, I could have put my shoes on the wrong feet too, or I could have done this, or the things that make us laugh. It's an interrupted war cry, and so the fact that our visitors seem to have a sense of humor makes me feel like, yeah, they're very highly evolved, but they're not completely different from us. They understand humor. They like to laugh. They understand irony and satire, and they like to play with the natives. Apparently, yeah. So there you go. That's good news. I mean, the last thing I want to meet are humorless, dour,
Right.
aliens, right?
You hear that a lot too, is that they're very, sometimes people, when that contactees are around them, they get that sense that they're very scientific, that they're not.
I don't think that. I think that they're a lot like us, but they're way advanced, and
That's
I think that maybe they see a potential in us to be like someday, but we have to get over this hurdle. And it seems, what's the
egos.
message? Egos, warlike behavior. Instead of laughing, we do the war cry and attack. And I think that they're trying to perhaps do some behavior modification with the human race. I hope, I personally hope that's what it is. There's a book, Ray Kurzweil. He wrote a book called The Singularity, and his opinion is that humanity is going to change within the next 50 years. And we might change so much we wouldn't even recognize ourselves if we saw what we become. He thinks we're going to merge with our computers, that our lifespan is be doubled, tripled, quadrupled. He thinks that we're just on the cusp of this change. And I think so too, but I don't think we're ready for it. And that seems to be the message a lot of people are getting their visitors. You guys aren't ready to join Star Trek. You're not there yet. You got to stop warring with yourselves. They don't want Star Wars. I think that that's a concern for them. I think that when we explode nuclear weapons, that it probably affects other dimensions as well. Who knows? Maybe the Trinity site was, under a schoolyard in the next dimension over. We're truly disturbing the universe when we play with these things like a book of matches. So I think that we're really trying. They're trying to retool us. Sometimes they're trying to shock us into retooling us ourselves. But I think we have to do it. I don't think they're going to come down and land on the White House lawn unless there's no hope for us at all. And I was told by one interesting person who did have Defense Department correlation there, that if they land on the White House, it's not going to be a good thing. We will have overlords. They will mean that we're not able to trust us, that we weren't able to keep ourselves from destroying ourselves and our planet, and that we will need babysitters forever. And I personally think that we should do everything in our power to not let that happen. And,
Absolutely.
yeah. It's heady stuff.
It is. I know in one of your earlier interviews too that you said, well, it's common knowledge that only about 5% of the cases turn out to be legit.
That's 5 to 10. And and
Okay.
I'm not really I don't I know that my chief investigator Gino talked a little bit about this in the documentary that we did, that I'm not going to take somebody's UFO away from them. All right. I'm not going to tell somebody, well, this is for sure a drone or this is for sure a balloon. I'll do my best to figure out what that was. If I can't explain what it was, that's a UFO. Doesn't mean it's a starship from another world, but maybe it is. But I mean, that's if you want real UFOs, you have to figure out what isn't a UFO. And it's mostly IFOs that people see. I mean, first time I saw a hobby drone, I thought I was seeing a UFO. I mean, it had little lights that were spinning around it. Seemed to be perfectly silent. And then it flew over my head. It was during a 4th of July celebration. And then it went up and they were taking a video of the fireworks. It was about 7-8 years ago or something. That was the first hobby drone I ever saw. And it confused me. So there's no shame in that. If somebody reports a drone as a UFO, or Mylar balloons can look confusing if they get caught in an updraft. But when you get a real UFO report, stuff stands out for you, and there are markers that you recognize, and I can usually tell. But, I'm not going to tell somebody you didn't see a UFO. I'll tell them, this is the best I can do. And it was a light in the sky, and it's very hard to, delineate exactly what that object was. And if you feel it was a UFO, it's probably a UFO. But I can't prove that it was a UFO. So that's kind of the tack that I take with. I'm not out to burst anybody's bubble,
The main reason I asked you this is I wanted to ask your opinion on the infamous TR3B. I came across a lot of people who have said they have seen it. What are your thoughts?
I know, too.
Oh, you got one.
I got a little one. I want a big one. Come on, Lockheed. You guys, you can build me one. I have an aerospace engineer friend who was buzzed by one. He was by LAX airport here with his dad. He was showing off his new converter to his dad. It's the guy that has worked on many, projects for NASA and Boeing and everybody else. Makes more money than I do. Anyway, but this thing that's not supposed to exist flies right over them. They had the 3 lights, one per corner. It had the big one in the middle. And it was just going like a bat out of hell, over the freeway towards the ocean. When I asked my friend how it made him feel, he said, well, the way I felt was I would really like to be on that project. Give me a budget, give me a team, and I'll whip one of those out, crank one out for you in a few months. So there you go. I hear rumors that they might be ours. I don't think the verdict is in on them, but we do seem to have a lot of reports of them military bases. Near Plant 42 is where Lockheed has their main plant here in Palmdale. There's a lot of sightings out there. There's sightings out by Point Magoo over here, and it's almost like a flight path that I can see between various Lockheed facilities. So maybe that's a coincidence. Maybe they're ETs and they're interested in what those guys are working on at Lockheed, or maybe it's theirs. I asked my wife's friend's husband, who works for them, if they were building it, and he looked at me. He said, "I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you." So that's my wife's best friend's husband that said that. I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you. And he didn't sound like he was kidding. So I think Barack Obama said that once when he was asked about the UFO phenomena.
Yeah.
Seems to be the pat response. Might be ours. I want to ride, you guys. Just don't, just take me back home, though, and don't lock me up in a deep underground cell somewhere. Yeah. Anyway, probably is never going to happen, but you
never know.
Never. Happened to Scully on X-Files, right?
Right?
Like Scully, come on. Yeah. So
Would you
anyway,
mind diving into what happened to you in 2019 a little bit?
what happened in 2019? I'm trying to figure out which.
Isn't that the year you had your contact?
That was closer to, it was around, I always have to think about it. It was 2016. It was that summer, and I'd been working as a MUFON field investigator for a while, and I was doing that CE5 thing we were talking about, where it was a lark, you know. I was like, well, I want to meet these guys, so might as well try it. You know, I meditated in my youth. I was actually pretty good at it, so I knew how to do that. You know, I came up with a focal point, which was the corner of the room, and I emptied my mind of thoughts and did the breathing through the nose, out through the mouth, and got into a meditative state. And I would put out, I want to meet you. And I was very naive. I actually said, you can even abduct me. I did send that out there. And I would suggest to your listening audience not to do that, because it was very, it was scary when it happened. But that's what I did this for maybe a week or two, and I wasn't thinking about it. I'd closed a case downstairs. We lived in a little two-story in Burbank. It was about a little after midnight, and I went upstairs. My wife was already asleep. I put a bunch of pillows behind my back, and you know, I like to sleep in kind of a semi-recumbent, you know, like you lean back your chair. That's kind of like how I like to sleep usually. So I'm just getting ready to sleep, and a weird thing happened. Our room started flooding with light. There was no source for this light, but it seemed to calm me. I thought of it as blue light, but it was more like it made me feel peaceful, like soothingly. I just think of the color blue or purples, and that was the way that it made me feel. But I think that it was just a white light, you know. No source, and that's impossible. Light works from a source, and the photons go out at the speed of light, and you know it's not like it's something that you can pour into your room or something. But this just seemed like the room flooded with this light. I felt very peaceful. We had crickets in our rafters. It was an old house. The crickets were perfectly silent, which didn't happen usually. You could usually hear traffic out. We lived by the Chandler bike path in Burbank, which is a busy area. Well, you couldn't hear any external sounds. It was like in Get Smart, the old sitcom where you had the cone of silence, that silly thing. But this was like a working cone of silence. It was no noise, perfectly peaceful, room flooding with light, and then things got strange. I realized I couldn't move my hands or my legs. I started feeling concerned at that point. I was not asleep, not fallen asleep, wide awake, because I couldn't move. I used to take care of quadriplegics, and I was suddenly rendered a quadriplegic. My wife is dead to the world, and she's usually a light sleeper, but she's sleeping through this whole thing. And it seemed like the light and the whole experience seemed to put me into what I would call a semi-hypnotic state, or a hypnagogic state, I guess is the correct term for it. Um, where time itself seemed to be very malleable, and it was hard to tell if it was 5 minutes or an hour. You know, time was acting weird. Uh, Light was acting weird. It was weird. Sound was acting weird. You know. Um, the center of our room, in front of the bed, there was our bathroom was off to the left. There was a closet that was off to the right, and then there was like this little cubby hole where we had our TV, you know, in that was in front of the bed. Well, that area started swirling in front of me, almost like if somebody had poured cream. I think of it this way, and is how I usually express it, because it's act like when you pour cream into a cup of coffee, right in the middle of your coffee, you see it spread out to the edges until the whole your coffee cup is a different color. That seemed to be what happened. It started in the middle and it went out to the periphery, the sides of it, about 7 feet across, and it opened up, which is impossible. I mean, our neighbor's house was like 8 feet away from our house. So there wasn't room to park a spaceship there, you guys. But somehow or another, there was space. I don't know if it was inside of a spaceship and they were doing this, or I have no idea how they did this. But 4 diminutive creatures came through that opening in the wall, and they were 4 foot tall, would be the tallest, maybe 3.5, 4 foot tall at the most. The elongated large heads, the mouth, the nose were just like an afterthought, like they're not fully formed, almost like an infant's features. Like he wasn't using his mouth to speak with. It didn't look like, but the big black eyes were there, just like you see in, portrayed on movies and commercials and what have you anymore. And this is when I was really scared, because I was trying to communicate with them with my mind, and there was no communication coming back. They seemed like a surgical team. Everybody had their job to do. Now, the best that I remember it is that they put tubes on either on my chest or on my upper arms, and possibly on my legs, although I couldn't really see that far down. I mean, I was just it happened fast, and it was out of my realm of experience. It was scary. It scared the hell out of me. But as far as I know, they either took blood or energy or both from me. I'm not sure which. Life force seemed to, I mean, I felt sort of emptied by this. And it scared me. I thought that maybe they were just going to, exsanguinate me, just drain me of all my blood. But they didn't. I think that the whole process took maybe a minute or two. They got what they wanted. The tubes detached, went backwards, and it seemed like they went through the hole that was in the wall. And the same creatures that came in through that way left that way. They didn't walk out. They were pulled. They floated like maybe a millimeter over the carpet. They didn't walk up, and they didn't turn around and walk away. Their eyes were still on me when they were distant and they were past the hole in the wall. I could see them diminish until you couldn't see them anymore. They were gone. And the hole closed up. It took me maybe 3 to 5 minutes before I could move. The room was still flooded with light. When I could move, I started shaking my wife, and I was screaming and yelling at the top of my lungs. I mean, the neighbors I must have woken somebody up. And my wife was not happy. She didn't see any of this, although she did see the room was still flooded with light. She couldn't explain that. But, her whole attitude was, oh my God, you've joined this crazy UFO group and now you're aliens. I think that she thought that I had a mental breakdown. Thankfully, 2 nights later, I'm being shaken awake. It's my wife, and she's pacing next to that. She was very upset. The room was flooded with light again, but there was no hole in the wall. I didn't see any creatures. But what my wife said, I will never forget. She said, oh my God, you need to tell your little friends that they need to leave us she used a pretty bad word, alone. I didn't sign up for this, and they need to leave us alone. And I was relieved, because at least my wife knew that I wasn't insane. She mentioned your little friends. I didn't really tell her what they looked like, so my guess is that she actually saw them. My wife only remembers the room flooding with light now. She doesn't remember saying what she told me, or shaking me, or pacing, or any of that stuff. But I'll tell you, I sure remember it. But she can't explain the light, and she knows that something happened, and she knows that something anomalous happened. Because the third night was just, we both woke up. Our room was flooded with light again, but this time it was coming from outside as well. And we ran to the window, and you could see our backyard and the neighbors' porches and stuff. It was all lit up. It was lit up like daytime. Lights were coming on and stuff. And we're looking at each other, Lisa, my wife and I, and it was like we had the same thought at the same time. Like, I don't think that it's what we were thinking. I think that it was a projected thought to give us something to blame it on that was prosaic. But the thought came in, oh, it's just a neighbor's porch light. Right, the whole room is lit, it's not a porch light. If you took a spotlight from, I mean, the movie premiere spotlights and shoved it in my face, it would have the same effect. So we looked at each other, we laughed, and we said, that's not a porch light. Nobody said a word. So we shared this telepathic moment. And then she remembers this bit anyway. So she knows, I think my wife knows that we were targeted somehow for some reason. Maybe it's so I could relate to people that have had experiences as well. Or maybe it was just the culmination of my mom's life and everything else. And that was the way that it finally manifested. But that was our weird week. That's I still refer to it as that. I'll mention, well, that was our weird week, Lisa. And yeah, she knows what I'm talking about. And that's my experience. After that happened, I started having amazing synchronicities happen in my life. It seemed like I was better at connecting the dots, like intuitive, like my intuition was kicked up. It seemed like it changed me. It wasn't just a horror story. I would not go back and have that not have happened to me. I think that it changed me profoundly as a person. It's probably why I'm talking to you right now.
It's amazing. And was there any fear based when this was happening to you, or any other sensations such as
Oh, I was
smell
scared to
or
death.
cold?
I don't remember any smells. It seemed like it was shirt sleeve environment. It didn't seem like that had changed. It was, we live in Southern California. It wasn't too hot. It wasn't too cold. It just seemed almost clinical. Um, but it was physical and spiritual as well. It wasn't like, seeing a ghost, because I could feel their hands on me. I could feel the pressure and I could feel my energy being drained from myself. But there was stuff that happened that's impossible with our physics. And maybe they do something, maybe when they flood your room with that light. I mean, everybody says the same thing. When they've seen it, they know what you're talking about. They say it's not light, but it is light, but it's something more than that. It's something we don't understand. And I think that maybe they kind of create a little bubble universe where their physics works and they can do their thing. But I think that they almost have to set it up like a stage. And that's when they come in, and that's when the action happens, But it always seems like there's a prelude to it, the flooding with the light. I spoke with two people today on the phone who were experiencers with the same stories. I mean, their stories were different. The one guy, it was a one-off. It was light beings that he met. But again, he was flooded with light first. The other woman I spoke with, it was the same thing, but again, it was in her bedroom, and the room flooded with light, and she saw the four little creatures. They always seem to work in tandem. They don't seem to work alone very often. Sometimes you'll hear that, but that's the weirdest thing that ever happened to me. I still have to pinch myself. There's a part of me that just recoils against the idea, because it's not like I'm a scientifically minded guy, but I can't explain it. I accept that it happened and it changed my life. And other people describe the exact same thing happening to them. So there's something going on, you guys. Hmm.
Do you think they've ever returned, or even in a dream sense, since that happened to you in
I've had a
2016?
couple UFO sightings that felt like teachable moments. There was one where I again felt almost like in a trance state. And the scary thing is, I was driving to work. It was in the morning. It was like 7 o'clock in the morning. And I saw a UFO and I saw it up close. And I didn't do any of the stuff that I'd been trained to do. If I have a close encounter with a UFO, I wasn't in control of my own actions. I didn't take a photo, I didn't take a video. I was suddenly the most important thing in the world was to not be late to work. I drove right past this miracle and it changed an aspect. Um, it seemed like it was maybe 40 feet across and V-shaped, hovering over the schoolyard. No propulsion that I could see. I looked for how it could be, hung, maybe tethered to telephone poles. I mean, I'm thinking, somebody's trying to pull a hoax. And but the closer I got to it, it seemed like it was suddenly 10 times as large and maybe like a mile away. And I think that it was a teachable moment to let me know that you may train to do certain things. You may have an idea of how to explain this, but we're going to take that away from you. You can't explain this. You can't really train to act a certain way because we're in control. And once I was out of the realm of influence, I was about 3 miles away from where it happened. I pulled my car over. I was disgusted with myself. I was ready to fire myself from MUFON. I was like, I didn't do anything right. You know, I didn't even put a case report into it because I was so embarrassed about it. But they were in control, and it felt like a continuation, Josh, of what happened back in 2016. It seemed like it was connected to that, but they were showing me something about themselves, a teachable moment. And I know other people have stuff similar that they've had happen, but no other.
Wow.
I haven't had any other face-to-face experiences. Some people, it becomes a regular thing, and I might not be so happy about it if that were the case. But for me, it was like our weird week, and that was kind of all she wrote as far as the face-to-face stuff goes.
It's so interesting. It sounds like they just made it, like they just pushed it right out of your mind, kind of like, nope.
I know. It's like Kurt Russell seeing the Phoenix Lights, and he lands, and it was like it never happened. He saw this miracle. He even reported it, and then it was like wiped from his memory until he saw it on television years later. And then it's like, oh my, I'm the pilot that called that in. You know, it's just the weirdest phenomena, but it has a certain poetry and a certain beauty to it that's all of its own. And we're certainly not alone, Josh. And I think that we're in good shape. I don't think if they were here to invade us, they're doing a horrible job. I mean, they've been
Right.
here. If you're just talking like since Roswell, that's been 75 years ago. And here we are, our greatest threat is still ourselves, the threat of extinction is us, and who's going to nuke who. So I I think that, ultimately, this is not a malignant or malevolent thing. I think that personally, it's probably always been here, but this is a way that it manifests for our age, and it's quite beautiful, actually.
It's exciting to see what will happen in the future. Another question I was going to ask is a hypothetical that I asked another MUFON agent. What do you think would have happened if our government just would have been honest with Roswell? How vastly
Things would be
different the
way
world would have
different.
been.
I think that it would be a much better situation right now. I think that, that lie built upon lie, built upon lie, built upon lie. And now it's this big house of cards built out of lies. And they're just to death of what they're going to have to confess to, I think. This is why they wanted to call them UAP instead of UFOs. They wanted to rebrand it and act like it's something else because I don't think that they treated people very well in the town of Roswell when this happened. There's stories of children being threatened with death if they spoke about it, and even Mac Brazel, he didn't commit any crimes. They locked him up in the Roswell jail, and he had like a police escort for a couple weeks. And they paid him off to shut his mouth. They didn't pay him that much. I guess he was able to buy a new car or something, and that was it. So I think that if they had been honest, I mean, it's a wonderful question, Josh, and I've never been asked that before. Things would be much different. I know my friend Denise Marcel would be happier about the whole situation right now. I mean, that family, Denise and her brother Jesse Marcel Jr. and John Marcel, they have to live with the fact that the government lied about their grandfather, and said that even was the head of security at our only atomic base that we had at the time. It's where we sent the Enola Gay from to bomb, Hiroshima. For God's sake. So he was the head of security there. And they said that he did not know the difference between a spaceship and a stupid weather balloon with a hole in it. Now, I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. If it's a weather balloon, why do you get a plane to fly ship a plane load of debris to right Patterson Airfield, and that's what they did. And they had him there as well, and they had us with that stupid balloon. And you could see the bag that the weather balloon had been just taken out of being there in the background. And the expression on Jesse Marcel Sr.'s face is like, you got to be kidding me. You're going to make me do this and say this. It was unconscionable on their part. And I hope someday they come clean, just for the Marcel family's sake. Now, their grandfather should be, next to Neil Armstrong in the dictionary and encyclopedia and stuff, But instead, he's called the guy that didn't know the difference between a spaceship and a weather balloon. Yeah, it disgusts me. They're the family, they're friends of mine. I mean, Denise worked for me for a while as a field investigator. I've had dinner with them and everything, and it affected their family. And he should have been given a medal. He should have been, known as the guy that first came across an extraterrestrial crash. And instead, they just, swept it under the rug, and it's still under there.
Sad. The world's like what could have been.
Yeah. Now it's up to us. People ask me, is disclosure going to happen? And I say, well, that's what's happening now as we speak. I'm not being arrested for talking about this stuff. I'm not being threatened. I don't have men in black coming to my door. People from officialdom have actually been really forthcoming and kind to me, as far as telling me about my mom and stuff like that. So I think that, but disclosure, if you're waiting for somebody in the government to say that, ETs are real, I mean, it was on the front page of the New York Times. The Tic Tac was, that story came out about the Tic Tac incident. It's 2017 is when disclosure happened, as far as I'm concerned, because it said so on the front page of the New York Times. I mean, if the president were to come out and say, guess what? We're not alone in the universe. We're being visited by ETs. Well, if it was Donald Trump, half of the country would have said, oh, he's just like giving us disinformation again. And if it was Joe Biden that said it, they'd say, oh, he's finally gone.
He slapped it.
He finally is yeah. Anyway, you know how people are. I mean, you get to announce such a thing? We don't have a Walter Cronkite anymore. There's nobody that everybody trusts. One time in Tom, Forrest Gump, say its name. I'm getting old, but I mean, now they think that he eats babies and stuff. Because he votes a certain way. So, I mean, I don't know who you'd get to disclose. I mean, I guess it's down to us, and maybe that's the best way to do it. It seems to work. So we are disclosure. Welcome to the club, Josh.
Awesome. I'm glad to be here.
Important task.
Speaking of disclosure, do you want to tell us a little bit about your new documentary, I Want to Believe?
Sure. An independent maker, Jeremy Norrie, he's won a few prizes at film festivals, such. He approached MUFON about 3.5 years ago, saying that he wanted to do an independent documentary on MUFON and on ETs and what we do. And that's when I met him. And we'd talked, and I think we even filmed a little bit way back then, if I remember right. But then the whole COVID pandemic happened, and the doors kind of shut for a couple of years. But last year, he got hold of me and we started filming. I had two of my current field investigators were comfortable in front of camera and knowledgeable about the phenomenon join me in the project. And mostly he just interviewed me like you're doing, but I think it came to about maybe 12, 14 hours worth of interview with just myself. So he's released a film, MUFON. MUFON and UFOs. The proof is out there. You can this on the Tubi app. It streams on Tubi for free, or you can get it from Amazon. It's available on Amazon Prime to rent or to buy. And I think on the Amazon Prime, you can just watch it gratis. He just put out the second part of the video. It's going to be 3 different episodes that he's going to put out. So the second part is now, in fact, it was just released today. And the part 2 is called I Want to Believe, part 2. And I think it'll probably show up if you go to the MUFON, the proof is out there. MUFON and UFOs, the proof is out there on Tubi. It will eventually be on Tubi as well. They'll probably be together, like books on a shelf, so that you can watch 1, 2, 3 eventually. So, but now there's 2 films out, 3. I think we're mostly talking abduction cases in this episode. I know that he has Chuck Zukowski, who is my assistant state director's brother and is a famous ufologist in his own right. I just realized that he was in his production too. So I haven't seen it yet, but it is released now. In fact, that's what I'm going to do when I get off the podcast. Going to watch my
I honestly think that's what I'm going to do too.
It's good. He did a good job on the first one, but I haven't seen the second one. So hopefully, crossing my fingers, But it should be good.
I'm sure it'll be awesome.
And come
and
out.
Everybody be sure to check it out.
And if I can, just get this in here. If what I've talked about has touched anybody out there, it sounds like something that you've been through, or you'd like to report a UFO that you saw or your experience. If you MUFON.com, on that front page, there's 2 links. One, it says report a UFO. The other one says report an entity. And you can choose the appropriate one, and it will take you about 15, 20 minutes to fill out a sighting report. Myself or somebody like me will get hold of you and investigate your case for you. And we're on your side. We hope it's a UFO. So yeah, you're amongst friends, and I love working with MUFON. I can't say enough good things about the organization. I love working for them. So there you go.
Awesome. It's been a real pleasure. It's awesome having you on. It'd be awesome to talk to you again in the near future.
Sure. I'd love to, Josh. It was a real fun show.
And yet again, it was a pleasure having you on. Learned so much. Thank you. And everybody have a great night.
Keep on looking up.